Tim, would you like to start? Tell people who you are.
Okay, hi, I'm Tim Smith. I'm the treasurer of ISACA, San Diego. I just retired from 20 years with KPMG, both the US member firm as well as the last 10 years as part of KPMG International, the parent of all the KPMGs, where I did specialized in audit data and analytics on their homegrown audit platform.
Is it?
And then before that, I had.
Hey, Tim, it's Laz. That's almost like thank you for your service moment. Thank you. It's like you're shaping the industry for the next wave. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's nice. So who's up?
I'll just go real quick. I'm Dave Tuckman. I serve as the president for the ISACA San Diego chapter. And when I'm not here, I serve as an information security consultant for a company called FR Secure out of Edina, Minnesota. But I am working remote from San Diego. Our third panelist, Laz, was able to, so glad you could make it and be here.
Well, no, thanks for the invite. Yeah, so my full name is Demetrius Lazarikis. Laz is easier. Been in CISO 4 times, been in the security space for several decades. I'd also been an entrepreneur a couple times. And my focus this year has been working with early stage companies and investors to understand where the biggest risk to revenue is as they build their security programs in a modern day. And that is really tightly coupled with AI and leveraging emerging technologies. I'm an adjunct professor at Pepperdine, also at Orange, in City of Orange with Chapman. And I'm working very closely with the OWASP AI working groups.
Awesome. And we'll go ahead and hand it over. Thomas, I'll let you go first, and then Michael.
Sure, thank you. I'm Thomas Lee. I got to be very clear at the beginning. I am not a cybersecurity person, and I'm not a cybersecurity expert. I am the CEO of Viva Security, and I'm a scientist. And we develop regression models and data for cybersecurity people. So I'd like to be clear. I'll be showing what we learned from regression modeling, but you're the expert, and I really am looking towards you to tell me what you think about what we found, what your interpretations are, and so forth.
Cool.
Is that good?
No, that was excellent. Yeah.
I'm Michael Stoyanovich. I've been in IT as a CIO, a CTO. I've also worked as a COO at a pharmacy benefit manager, benefits administration. And when I was a much younger guy, I did a variety of startups. So I've got a variety of that experience now at Siegel. Primarily what I do is help organizations with their risk management strategies, in particular around privacy and security. So that's what I spend a lot of my time on, but not all of my time. And I got a ISACA certification as well.
And your voice still is a little quieter than everybody else's. Yeah.
Try and make it louder.
Yeah, or
The
use
speakers
your
on the
outdoor voice. Yeah. So from what we got in the chat, are you able to hear the other people okay? Please say yes.
I can hear everybody fine.
I can hear everybody just fine too. So.
Okay. So we'll just have you use your outdoor voice.
Yes, that's
There you go. Cool. Okay, and then Mary, I saw that you had your hand up. I've got it where you can, if you had something you'd like to say, I got you. And you're on mute now.
You can unmute her.
Can I? That is. Just says ask to unmute.
Sorry, I meant to, don't need my hand raised, Bart. Sorry.
Oh, all righty. Then with that, Thomas, if you'd like to go ahead and bring up the screen, we can go ahead and
Yeah.
dive.
Okay, let me get started here. I want to make sure everybody can see my screen. Can everybody see?
Yep.
All right, let me get started. Again, I'm Dr. Thomas Lee. I'll be teaching about regression models that we developed several years ago, and we've been working on since. So it's forecasting data breaches. Again, I want to emphasize that I'm not a cybersecurity person. I'm a scientist. Michael and I will be doing this together. He's kind of like the interpreter of what we found. He is a cybersecurity expert, and he will explain kind of what some of our findings really mean from the cybersecurity perspective. So let me get started. So this is what we're going to cover. I'm going to talk about probability and how to understand it. Probability is not something we deal with very much in cybersecurity. I'm going to tell you how we would develop a model for the probability of a data breach. Then I'm going to tell you sort of what we learned from the model. And finally, I'm going to sort of show you, there's so many ways that you could use this model. One of the ways is to help right-size your security team. And at the very end, I'll talk about that. And I don't mind if you ask questions as I get going, although also, you know, we'll have a discussion time at the end. So that's another good time to really dive in with questions. So let me talk about what is probability to begin with. So first, you need to know that that the model that I'll be telling you about today is the probability for a reportable PII data breach. I know in cybersecurity, there's cybersecurity events, there's lots of different things that can happen. This is a model very specifically for a PII data breach that would require reporting by law. And if you wonder why it is so narrowly focused, it's only for this kind of incident that we knew we could get a full data set that we could model with. I guess reportable means it is would require reporting by law, for example, HIPAA or all the different states. It's important to know that the data breach could be caused by a lot of different ways. I mean, we tend to only think about a malicious outsider, but there's accidents and there's loss of stolen devices. There's malicious insiders, and all of these are different ways that cybersecurity reportable PII data breach could occur. Just one other thing is, as I present this, sometimes I'll talk about probability, you know, a percentage per year. And sometimes I'll be talking about frequency. And it's important to know that you can invert the frequency and get probability and vice versa. So a 1% probability is once in 100 years, for example. All right. So if I say something like 25-year frequency for a data breach, what does that really mean? That's a 4% probability. So I can invert 25 and I can get 4%. Okay, so what does it really mean? I mean, on the face of it, it sounds pretty good. I mean, 25 years, a lot happens in 25 years. I mean, you can meet somebody and get married and have a child, and they can grow up and go to college, and all of that can happen in 25 years. So it seems like a pretty good number, but that's not what 25 years really means. So what it really means, a way to think of it, is just picture 25 companies, each with a 4% probability, like I've got here. What it really means is that among these 25 companies, every single year, one of these companies will have a data breach. That's what it means. And if you think about it in modeling, for sure, we don't wait 25 years or 1,000 years as we're collecting data. So this is what it means. Why is that important? Because those could be your vendors. And I hope you can see that having your data breached every single year would be unacceptable. So a 4% probability once in 25 years is a terrible probability for a large data breach anyway. And this is the way you should think of it. And so this is how we look, at least as far as third parties, how we look today. We look one by one only with a SOC 2 report or a questionnaire. But what we really need to think about is the risk in aggregate. And this is the way we need to think about it for you and me and for our third parties. And this is why it's important to calculate probabilities and not just have scores. Scores are not useful for figuring this out. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about a model that we developed. And it's an empirical regression model that can calculate the probability for a data breach. And essentially, to do this, we're looking for the differences between companies that did and did not experience a data breach. That's what we're looking for. Okay, so to build an empirical regression modeling, by the way, an empirical means that we discover the predicting factors. It's like empirical science. It doesn't mean it's for royalty or something like that. It means that we discover it. All right. To be able to build a regression model, we need two sets of data. We need to know all the companies that did not have a data breach, and we need to know all the companies that did have a data breach. And we can bring these together into a single set of data. And this is what we're going to train on. So in regression modeling, you train. And just for your information, there's about, I don't know, 3,000 to 5,000 reportable PII data breaches every single year in the United States. And in the United States, there's about 5 to 7 million companies. And so this constitutes our data set. Okay, so to do regression modeling, we need to find some factors that we can measure for this full data set for all companies in the United States. Now, I know you could think of all sorts of predictive factors, but they wouldn't be useful because we can't measure them for all companies in the United States. So I'm sure you could think of cybersecurity controls that would be very predictive. Cybersecurity spend, I mean, I would love to try that in a model, but guess what? They're not useful because we can't even measure those for a fraction of the companies in the United States. So one of the problems we need to solve is we need to think of something that we could possibly measure for all companies and that would also be predictive. A second problem is you need to know there is no comprehensive source of data breaches in the United States. There's lots of sources, but they're not comprehensive. I mean, you could think of HHS, for example, or California Attorney General, but most of these sources don't even begin reporting data breaches until they affect more than 500 people. And the problem with that is that 70 to 80% of data breaches are under 500 people affected. So just like that, you're missing most of the data breaches. So the second problem to solve is how many data breaches are there in the United States? And I'm going to show you how we solve that problem. And it will give you a clue as to how predictive data breaches really are. So how do we figure out how many data breaches are there? All right, you got to know the magic source is Maryland Attorney General. So Maryland only represents 2% of the US population, but this is a magic source. And I'll tell you why. Because Maryland, perhaps because they're so little, require reporting data breaches, and they make them public all the way down to one single Maryland resident affected. I mean, look at the screen. This is back from 2018, so this is an old screenshot, but look at, these are data breaches that just affected 3 people in the state of Maryland, and they had to be reported. All right, so this is the magic thing about Maryland, and we've been coding these data breaches for many years now. I got to tell you, I've been looking at the smiling face of Brian Frosch for years. They now have a new attorney general, but it's a very magic source even for you. One of the things you can do, it's very objective. They don't care. They're not trying to promote anything. You can go take a look at it. It's publicly available. And one of the things you can see is how many data breaches there are by year. All right, what these are really is, it's not a database per se, but these are legal notifications sent in by the various law firms that companies hire when they have a data breach. And we read these data breaches, these notifications, and we code the data. And this is what it looks like. I mean, you know, we entered into our database, we get the name of the company, the state, the headquarters state where the company resides, how many people are affected, and so forth. And one of the things we discovered is these are data breaches all across the United States and even around the world. Anybody that does business in the state of Maryland, if they have a breach, they report it to Maryland. Sorry. So we wondered, could we predict these data breaches? I mean, maybe we're just silly scientists. I don't know, but it seemed interesting. Could we predict the number of data breaches observed by state that are reported into Maryland? So for example, could we predict that there are going to be 23 data breaches in Georgia that are going to affect somebody in Maryland? And I got to tell you, we were surprised to discover that we could, and we could do it really accurately. And you're never going to guess what the predictors are. I'll show you what they are. The GDP of the state and the driving distance to Maryland. The GDP of the state and the driving distance to Maryland accurately predicts the number of data breaches that we observe reported to Maryland. I'm going to just show you how accurate this is. So Maryland itself, the model would predict 65, and we observe 67. Going up, 400 miles north to the state of Massachusetts, the model predicts 22. We observe 21 data breaches reported to Maryland. Going clear across the country, well, not clear across, but partway across 1,400 miles to Texas, the model predicts 57. We observe 55 data breaches reported to Maryland. Little Iowa, 1,000 miles from Maryland, the model would predict 6. We observe 5. And finally, clear across the country to our good old state, California, the model predicts 97, and we observe 99. Now, what's even more incredible is we have every kind of economy here: oil for Texas, agriculture for Iowa, and technology for California, yet GDP is still predictive. That's amazing. So, okay, so why would driving distance matter? If this is if it was an in-person talk, people could just shout out what they thought it is. I'm going to say it's not like Maryland is some evil place, and the closer we get to Maryland, the more likely you are to have a data breach. Really, maybe what it is a distance filter. And if data breaches, a lot of data breaches are local, then the further we get from Maryland, the less likely we're going to see the data breach affects somebody in Maryland. And that's exactly what we found. When we looked more closely at the data breaches, a lot of them, especially smaller ones, were local. A CPA, a dentist's office, a doctor's office, a lawyer's office. So this told us that if we set the distance to 0 in this model, so if we set distance is one of the input factors to the model, if we set that number to 0, it would be as if the state was right on top of Maryland. And now we would actually have a measure of the number of the total data breaches for that state. And so that's what we did. And this is the result right here. So we set the driving distance to 0. And so, for example, here the arrow is pointing to Kansas. The model would say there were 56 total data breaches for that state, 9 of them then that we see reported into Maryland. For Texas, another place here where the arrow is pointed, the model is saying a total of 110 data breaches for Texas, 55 of them affected somebody in the state of Maryland. So we've got one of the things we wanted. All we have to do is add up all these data breaches, all the total number of data breaches for each one of these states. I'm pointing to the wrong column. And we now have the total number of data breaches for the United States. And here it is. So for this particular year, we observed 3,000 data breaches for all of the United States. 771 of those are captured in Maryland. And we just solved one of the two problems that we had to solve. There were actually more than two problems, but that's all I'm showing you today. Okay, so what's the second problem we had to solve? What on earth could we possibly measure that would be predictive? And we could measure for all companies. And the answer is people. And we can get this, it's all publicly available. And specifically, you know, people with certain certifications. And it's just these 6 factors. The 6 factors are the number of employees, the number of people with Red Hat certification, the number of people with a Microsoft certification, the CISSP, the CISA, the number of employees with these 2 certifications, and the number of people in IT. And we've normalized these certifications by the number of people, the size of the IT department. Okay, so I'm going to take you through these, and then Mike is going to interpret them for you. So I'm going to give you a very dry sort of science look at these certifications, and he's going to interpret them in terms of cybersecurity theory. So the first thing to know is these 2 at the bottom, you can see the up arrow, and they're colored in red. They increase the probability for data breach. And these 3 at the top, which are colored in green, decrease the probability for data breach. One of the big discoveries is that CISA and CISSP are equal for their ability to reduce the probability for data breach. And I know that this is a surprise because I know the hiring rate for CISA, and they're hired at a much lower rate. They're also paid less. So I know that a business, they're always trying to save money. If they knew that, they would hire more CISAs. Another thing that we discovered is, you can see we're modeling for both small breach and large breach. One of the things that we discovered is a diminishing return when it comes to small breach. What that means is you can keep hiring and hiring these people, and it'll have less and less value at reducing the probability for small breach. And I'm going to show you that in a few slides when I show you the 3 Canadian banks.
Hey, Thomas,
Yeah.
just what's the differentiator in this between a small and a large breach?
Good question. Small breach, you know, really what's small and large depends on the company. But from a modeling perspective, the effect is very strong for breaches like 10 to 100 or 1,000 employees, people, excuse me, affected. And then it begins to go away as you get into 100,000 and 1 million. But you still see a bit of the small breach effect, even with a breach affecting 1 million people. And it's a really good question. You'll see that when we look at the 3 Canadian banks, and I'll try and point that out to you, where sort of it's a gradual thing going from small to large breach. Okay, one of the things that we also see from the modeling is that for very large data breach, 10 million people affected, 100 million people affected, there is no diminishing return. It's a very strong relationship between the hiring rates for the CISSP and CISA and the probability for a data breach. And again, you're going to see that when we look at the 3 Canadian banks. So one of the things this tells us is this old adage, it's not a matter of if, but when it comes to data breach. That's not true when it comes to large data breach. So there's a lot of organizations that have hired a sufficient number of people to drive that probability down to near zero. And near zero, again, I'm going to show you examples of that. I mean, in the range of once in 10,000 years or 100,000 years. And you'll see that. All right. Michael, do you want to, I mean, one big mystery, why is Red Hat here? And why is it a negative predictor? And why is Microsoft a positive predictor? I mean, decreasing probability.
So actually, everybody, can you hear me a little better before I get going? Dave,
No.
is my voice a little louder now?
No,
No. Well, darn it.
you're still using that indoor voice.
Well, I'm trying to speak as loud as I can, so I apologize if that's not as loud as possible. So what I'm going to try and walk you through is, let's start from the bottom up.
Can you try and talk louder? We do have some people in the chat saying that they can't hear you.
All right.
This is the reason why.
Maybe if you move the microphone on the cord over closer to your mouth,
Yeah. Can you hear me now a little bit better?
much better.
All right,
Yeah.
very good. Excellent. So thanks, Dr. Lee. Appreciate it.
Really close to your mouth, like here.
Let's start.
Yeah.
Let's start from the bottom up, and let's just talk about that in general. Obviously, I think you all know logically and self-evidently the attack surface makes sense. Why that would be an indicator of overall breach effect, right? More devices, more people. Dr. Lee, I don't think he already mentioned it, but you can know how many people lose a device, lose a mobile phone, lose a laptop, and what that data leakage is. You can actually predict that percent. So the larger the organization, i.e. the larger the attack surface, the larger the mobile workforce, the larger the likelihood of a breach. Very self-evident there. So with Red Hat, I want you to know the first time I saw this data, I was surprised as well. I've been in enterprise IT for many decades. Just to let you know, I've dealt with mainframes, I've dealt with large Red Hat, clusters, and I've also just dealt with large, Windows and, distributions, and also on the cloud and on premises. So when I saw this, it got me thinking, and, I've been around long enough and I've played with this stuff enough myself. My own personal belief is Red Hat and any type of Linux distribution or Unix distribution, these are very powerful, very configurable systems. And unless you are thoughtful and systematic and know what you're doing, there is the potential to, frankly, misconfigure or just not configure something that you should be configuring. So my own personal opinion is it comes down to basically not having the right training and or the right expertise when you're deploying these. Moving up to the MCSA, the MCSA, it really comes down to it's a good general suite of IT certifications, both the old one and the new one. And I see in my consulting, when I go out into the environment, organizations that have at least some IT certification, generally they have more systematic processes and protocols. They have more systematic approaches to everything they do, from organizational change management and rolling new systems into the environment to cybersecurity. So the idea that a general IT certification would have a positive effect, again, my own opinion based on my history and what I see also on a day-to-day basis, makes sense. Now, the top two, those are the really interesting things for me. I want you to know I've hired CISSPs, I know CSSPs. That really wasn't surprising to me. Yes, this is what I would expect of a model like this. The CISA actually was a novel insight for me, and the fact that it was just as valuable and useful to an organization as the CISSP, that really was illuminating for me, and actually, I found really, really valuable. And I want you to know, I actually now in my consulting with clients, tell them, hey, look, we all know it's hard to hire cybersecurity people. There's a shortage of them. If you can get one, or the other, from a breach perspective only, again, we all know there's much more, as Dr. Lee alluded to cybersecurity than just worrying about a breach. But from a breach perspective, hey, if you can only get a CISA, hire the CISA. If you can't hire a CISSP, that's fine. From a breach perspective, you're going to actually have a real good benefit. So those are some of the things that I've seen and some of the, just some of the insights that I wanted to share. Is there anything else that, Dr. Lee, I didn't bring up that you think we should bring up?
I thought I'd just mention, it's important to know that when we're coding the data breaches, we have no clue if a data breach occurred in a Unix system or not. So in my opinion, the Red Hat, it's not a causation, it's more of a correlation, an inverse correlation. So I think Linux is just a much more rare operating system. Certainly, it doesn't mean that you want to get rid of your Red Hat people. I mean,
Nope.
you definitely want them, but I think it's just it's a sort of an indirect measure of the degree to which Linux is being used within an enterprise. And I've had one CISO make the interpretation for me. He said, it's just another technology stack, a little bit more difficult one to secure, and he needs more people to secure it. And just to fit with that observation, at the end, I'm going to give you some information on average numbers. When we look at average certification numbers, we see that companies that have more RHCE certified employees also have more CISSPs and CISAs, is if the organizations are recognizing the additional burden from Linux and that they have more robust security teams for that reason. And I think that Microsoft reduces probability because unlike Linux, everybody's got Microsoft. And so we're really, in effect, measuring the degree to which IT is trained in the systems that they support. The same CISO used our data to go to IT and say, I would really like you folks to get certified in the systems that you support. He says, that's what we do in the military, and I'd like to see that done here. And he could use our data to back up his opinion. That's all I've got. There's more to say here, and I can go on to the next slide. Should I do that?
Yeah, actually, why don't we move on?
Okay.
Yeah. And Michael, I'm going to challenge you to keep talking louder and louder.
Absolutely. I apologize, everyone. Just so you all know, I got a new laptop. My old one crashed, and my Bluetooth headset couldn't pair, so I'm using some backup headphones. So. Pardon me.
Okay. So important. Go ahead.
Where did it go? We have a question.
Yeah. Let me go back.
From Riley. Because of the mandated reporting metrics, did you see the data lean towards certain sectors?
No. And I'll tell you what the difference, but you mean by business sectors, right? I'll tell you what the difference is. So this is a really accurate model. It's amazingly accurate. We can pick out 0.4% of the companies that are responsible for 50% of the data breaches. I propose to you that the differences we do see by sector more reflects staffing by sector. I mean, generally speaking, I see banks are better staffed as far as cybersecurity than, let's say, healthcare, for example. And so I propose to you that's probably the difference between sectors, the amount of money that they have that they can spend on cybersecurity, and possibly the degree to which they're regulated and focus more on cybersecurity. Again, maybe banks are more regulated for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
So, and in fact, we did an analysis across Fed territory in the United States, and we found, by the way, a very large variability between Fed territory, a 5 times difference in hiring rates for as a proportion of the size of the company. That's my comment. We tried to very hard. We tried to make a model that was sort of agnostic to industry and just sort of was just very predictive for data breach, whatever industry it happened to be. All right, we could talk about that more in the second hour. So let me tell you some more about modeling. So the modeling process is a long process. It was 1 year of work to develop the very first model. You're trying a lot of things in the modeling. It's empirical modeling. So you're experimenting and you're trying to figure out what is predictive and what is not. And you're trying to build this best model that you can. So there's a lot of things that you try and get rid of in the modeling process. And they teach you a lot about the problem, but they never show up in the final model. And I want to tell you about some of those things. Okay, so one of the things that we discovered in the modeling process is that simply counting the number of employees that say they work in cybersecurity, that was very predictive, very predictive. But counting the people with certifications was way more predictive. And so, of course, we're going to use certifications in the model, but this teaches us something about the problem. Some people say the certifications are a racket. I don't know, but I'll tell you from a statistics perspective, they're really predictive and they're apparently very, very effective. And so I'd like to make the observation that whatever the heck goes on in the certification problem in maintaining the certification that you have, it apparently is very predictive and very effective at reducing the probability for data breach. Okay, so that's one observation. Another thing you need to know is that we tried many certifications in the modeling process. We tried a lot of cybersecurity certifications. They're hard to get. I mean, it was a very time-consuming to try a lot of certifications. Every single certification we tried in the model was very predictive.
And
Every
Dr. Lee, if I could-
certification.
Yeah, if I could just jump in on that one. So before the presentation started, we were having a brief conversation about various.
Well, put the mic up to your mouth.
Oh,
Sorry.
we were having conversations about various certs, right? And Dave and I both share a CDPSE from ISACA, right?
Mhm.
And the point that Dr. Lee's making here is, and it's a nuanced point, but it's a valuable point for everybody to take away. There are the two certifications that are particularly impactful and valuable for the model, but all certifications, cybersecurity centric certifications, are actually significant and valuable and show an impact. It's just that, and Dr. Lee will show this in future slides, you don't need 40 variables to do the work of two, right? You just don't need it, and it's actually not necessary. And so really what that means is, in general, again, when I try and take this learning and I apply it pragmatically for my clients and the people that I try and help, what do I say to them? Well, hey, if you can't get a CISA, if you can't get a CISSP, but you have high quality certifications from high quality organizations, those people, if you are looking for a tiebreaker between who to hire, I would say, hire the person with the cybersecurity certification. There's a variety of different, reasons why that may be. It does take time and effort to be certified. To get certified, you have to prove that you've been in the industry, that you've done the work, that you take a test. You have to have people who verify and validate that what you said is true. You have to have some ethics. But then you also have to have continuous ongoing education. So that's the one thing is, hey, I've got a CDPSE. No, it's not as predictive for Dr. Lee's model, but it's still a good cert. And so are many of the others that all of you in the audience have. And that's one of the things that I want to make sure you all understand. It's not like, oh, well, I guess I don't have a CISA. I'm just not very good. No, that's not the takeaway. The takeaway is these are exceptionally good at predicting for the model, and we should use that. But other certifications, all quality certifications, add value to the organization.
I would just add, I mean, one way to view the CISSP and CISA is they're simply most ubiquitous. And in modeling, we're looking at all companies in the United States. Most are small. And you know, it's the CISSP is a certification that you can begin to see in small companies where you wouldn't see anything else. You might see a CISSP or a CISA. And I think that's why these two certifications are so much more predictive than the others. Not that they're better, they're just most ubiquitous. Of course, they're very good. But keep in mind, if we're looking at a very large organization, we'll see all the different certifications. Maybe we can discuss that more towards the end. Another thing you need to know is the CISA is different. It's different from all these other certifications. It's a certification that we can include with CISSP in a model, and it's still predictive in the model. In fact, it's equal to CISSP in the model. So the CISA seems to be telling us something else about cybersecurity. It seems to be a whole different aspect to cybersecurity that we're not capturing, you know, with these other certifications. And I'm going to talk about that some more. Can I go? Do you want to say anything else, Mike, before I move on? Okay. I have some slides. I call them my shopping cart slides. I'd like to make an analogy to building a model. If you were to go to the grocery store, I know you all have done this. You go to the grocery store and you see somebody with, I don't know, a full shopping cart, and you say, you know what, they have a lot of kids at home. So let's just imagine that we are going to build a model, an empirical regression model, and we're going to try and predict family size by what we see in people's shopping carts. All right. Okay. So imagine that we discover milk is a good predictor. That makes sense, right? Little kids like milk, more milk in the shopping cart, probably more kids at home. All right. So imagine that we also find cereal is a good predictor. I mean, I don't know about you, but if I see like sugar frosted flakes, I know they have kids at home. All right, but here's the thing. Cereal is a good predictor by itself, but if we put it in a model with milk, it's no longer improving the model. All right, so good modeling practice, we would take it out of the model.
And actually, if I can jump in real here, Dr. Lee, and make a connection to my comment.
Put the mic to your mouth.
If I could jump in real
There you
quick
go.
again,
Thanks,
Dr.
buddy.
Lee, just to make a connection to the previous slide. This is that example of, you know, let's just assume the top one was the CISSP, i.e. the milk, and the frosted flakes, that's like my cert, the CDPSE. We know, yes, it's indicative of having kids to have frosted flakes, but you don't need to actually see that to suspect they have kids because the milk already tells you that. Again, it's like the same thing that I wanted to point out with other certifications. The CISSP, the CISA, they're like the milk. The other certs, we don't need them to know the same information, so we pull them out of the model.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Imagine, to go on, that we discovered diapers is a good predictor. But not only that, but we can include them in the model with milk, and they're still a good predictor. Okay, so what's going on here? I would propose that milk and cereal are measuring the same kind of thing. They're measuring older kids old enough to drink milk and cereal. And the diapers are measuring something completely different. They're measuring infants, children too young to drink milk and eat cereal. Okay, just like Michael said, the CISSP is kind of like the milk. And the cereal is like all these other certifications that we also find to be very predictive, but we don't need them in the model because we already got the milk and they don't improve the accuracy. And the diapers is kind of like the CISA. And I don't mean that the CISA have to kind of clean up the mess afterwards. I mean that they're measuring a completely different aspect in cybersecurity that we're not capturing with the CISSP. So this is our best model for predicting the number of children at home. Now, I gotta say, you can't just put milk and diapers in your shopping cart and go home. Your family will get sick, right? You need a whole lot more things in the shopping cart. You need, I don't know, hot dogs and ice cream and cookies in the shopping cart if you want to have a healthy family. So, but
And
go ahead.
Dr. Lee, that's just it. That's where I want to sort of make a quick connection for those of you out there who, day to day, many of us, live by frameworks, be it the NIST CSF or the HIPAA
Let me-
security rule, or some other framework that we use to either because it's regulated and imposed on us, or because we use to guide what we do on a day-to-day basis. Those other things in the shopping cart are like your other patterns and practices in your cybersecurity protocols, right? That's like you implementing your NIST controls or your ISO 27001 controls. That's what some of the other stuff in the shopping cart is. It's not that, again, to Dr. Lee's point and what he pointed out early on, this model is predicting a specific thing, an incredibly important thing to predict, but you do need other things to have a healthy family, and you need other things in your cybersecurity system, your structured program, to have a healthy cybersecurity program, right? That's really what I wanted to make sure I alluded to and I pointed out for everybody's benefit.
Yeah, but what's cool is all we need to do is measure the milk and the diapers or the CISSP and CISA to get an accurate prediction. But for sure, keep in mind, there's a lot of other stuff in the shopping cart when you're using the model. All right. Let me move on and let me give you an example of actually applying the model here. And so I'm going to apply it to three banks. And let me just go to the slide. Let's see, can I bring up the chat? I just like to, here I've got 3 banks. Now, they're Canadian banks. They're Canadian banks because the first time I presented this, it was to ISACA Toronto. And the Canadians, by the way, love this. But just look at the numbers for a moment in the chat and tell me, don't look at the numbers in the chat, look at the numbers on the screen, but in the chat, tell me which bank, Bank A, RBC, or Bank B, which is TD Bank, or C, which is BMO, which bank do you think has the lowest probability for a data breach? And am I looking at the chat? Yeah, I'm looking, just type something into the chat, A, B, or C. Okay, most everybody's saying, oh, a few people said C. Okay, that's really good. Okay. Oh, there's another C. Okay.
Hey, just real quick, Thomas. Hey, Michael, people are still having trouble hearing you. So just next time, if you want, even if you want to give it a shot without the headphones and see if the laptop mic might even pick it up better, because you're saying some great stuff and
you sound really good when you hold the mic in front of your mouth, but not on the side. You're very clear with it in front of your mouth. Okay.
Got it. Thank
So,
you.
okay, so most people pick B and C. I don't see anybody that, so here's the funny thing. A lot of the Canadians pick A. Because RBC has such a good reputation in Canada. So my first comment is don't be fooled by brand. All right. I'll tell you, the answer is C, but a close runner-up is B, and I'll show you how to look at this and see that really the lowest probability bank, I'm not saying they're the best, is C. Okay, so let me go on. So we can take these head counts that you see on the left and we can plug them into the model, and these are the outputs. And let me help you see how to read these. So the first row is the size of the data breach. So the model gives us a range. Dave, this goes back to your question. Well, I'm almost there to answer your question about where does small data breach and large data breach happen. The way to read this is one or more people affected, 10 or more, 100 or more, all the way up to 100 million or more people affected. The next row is the annual probability for having a data breach. And the next row after that is just the inverse of the probability. That's the frequency or the mean years between data breach. Oh, I forgot I animated these. So there's the arrows, the mean years. All right, so let me show you how I analyze these companies. If I just do it visually, and you can learn a lot. I mean, you don't even need to see the model to be able to do this. The first thing I do is I look at the size of the company. And the first thing that I see is RBC and TD are really big banks, and they're very close in size. And then the next thing that I see is, of course, the CISSP and CISA headcount. And I think just like you folks noticed, TD Bank has a lot more CISSPs and CISAs than RBC. But I want to show you something. Look at the probabilities for small data breach. And Dave, I've kind of highlighted all the way up to 1,000 or more people affected. If you see these two banks, there's actually very little difference between them. I mean, the probability is about 4 to 5 years on average, or 20%, 25%. So this is the diminishing return effect. And so one of the take homes is that large companies, because of the diminishing return, they can't hire enough people to drive the probability for small data breaches much lower than this kind of number. And when you look at large companies, you'll see that they regularly have small data breaches. Apple, Google, Microsoft, they have small data breaches, and it's on this sort of frequency. The other thing to see is that BMO has a much lower probability. It's half the probability. It's every 8 years, not every 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so a second take home is it's much easier for a small organization to manage small data breach. Now, 50,000 employees is maybe not that small, but you can see the trend. And as organizations get smaller and smaller, it's much more easy to prevent that very small data breach. Okay, the next thing I do is I look at the headcounts, CISSP and CISA and MCSA. And don't forget, it's normalized by the size of the IT. And so here it is. I plotted that for the 3 banks, now normalized by the IT size. And here it's much more apparent. TD really is much better than RBC. BMO is close behind, both for CISSP and CISA. So how does that translate into probability? Probability, remember back in the model, I said it's very sensitive to staffing levels for very large data breach. So even though TD and BMO are not 2 times better than RBC as far as staffing, they have TD Bank has a 5 times lower probability than RBC. And if we look at BMO, they're 8 times lower probability. So a take home here is for very large data breach, the model shows us that data breach is very sensitive. The probability for data breach is very sensitive to staffing levels. Now, back in the model, when I showed you the headcounts, I said there's a lot of companies that have driven the probability to near zero. You're seeing it here. Once in 10,000 years, and this is the worst of the 3 banks, and they're all fantastic. Let me say, once in 10,000 years, I mean, that's essentially, it ain't never going to happen. And for TD, it's 45,000 years. And for RBC, I can't see, the camera's right in the front, 66,000. Now, by the way, if you think these are absurd numbers, remember in the United States, there's 5 to 7 million companies. And remember, probabilities add up. So it doesn't mean that these data breaches will never happen. With enough companies and enough years, we will see data breaches even with numbers like this. Any comments before I move on? No? Okay, no interpretations. But I will make an additional comment. You know, when you see a company like RBC or TD and you see this many CISSPs, I'm telling you, there's a lot of certifications in these organizations. They've got every kind of certifications that you could imagine finding. But there are significant differences between organizations in these different kinds of certifications. We didn't explore that in the modeling, and I would be really interested in knowing what you think. I mean, if you were to look at these other certifications, how you would judge these banks, what it would teach you about the organizations if you were to look for some of these other certifications. Privacy, I don't know what the certifications are. There's cloud certifications and so forth. All right, maybe we could talk about that in the discussion. So I'm going to wrap this up with just one example way you can use the model. There's so many ways. Third-party risk management is a very powerful way. But one way is, you know, to turn to your senior management and help them get their security team right. For that, I want to tell you, we've analyzed a lot of companies, and we've analyzed the third-party, the vendor list for a lot of companies, the list of vendors that could expose a lot of data. And one of the things that we've discovered, we've plotted this information as if they were grades on an exam for each of the companies we've analyzed. And we get curves that look like this. So just to help you through understanding these curves, this is the probability down here along the x-axis for causing a third-party data breach. This is once in a million over here, and this is once in 100 over here. And each one of these curves is the distribution of vendors for all these different companies that you see highlighted. And I picked these companies because they represent quite a cross-section of companies in different industries, in different degrees of regulation. A $200 billion bank is a pretty big bank, 10,000 employees, and they have the Federal Reserve breathing down their necks all the time. All the way down to a 300 employee bank, you can imagine they're very lightly regulated. These two curves that crisscross right here, these are two benefit administration companies. They're regulated by the Department of Labor, very lightly regulated. The amazing thing when we look across all these companies is the probability distributions for their vendors are pretty much the same. They just plot on top of one another. Like I say, grades in an exam. This would be an A grade over here, and this would be an F grade for the vendors. And C grade would be right here in the middle. Well, so we can make some very general observations when we look at these curves, and we could say they'd be true for most companies. And one of the observations is that average is good. The average probability for these curves is 0.0%. That's once in 1,700 years. Tell me that's not a good number. The only reason we have third-party data breaches is because these numbers add up. And by the time you have 100 vendors, you begin to have trouble. But one of the observations is average is good. If you could just be average, you're doing great. And you have a reasonable and a low probability for a data breach. With this information, we can go back and we can discover with regression modeling what is average, looking across companies, looking across industries. Oh, I forgot I animated that. So I want to show you table that you can use. You can look back at senior management and you can say, you know what, we're below average. And I would like to make an argument for just being average. And these are the numbers we find with regression modeling.
And real quickly, let's just point this out, Dr. Lee. And this also, I know many of you have third-party risk management programs. Either you run yourselves or perhaps you, have some support to do it. One of the things I would argue that you would want to do is, yes, you do your usual due diligence. You look at, gee, are they high trust certified? You read the SOC 2s. You look for the complementary controls. You review the NIST CSF reports. You do all the things you should do and that you currently do. Nobody's saying that, but I would argue you'd also want to start to ask them in your questionnaire, be they you look at their SIG or their SIG Lite or your own questionnaire. You want to ask, how many CISSPs do you have? How many CISAs do you have? And you can compare that with the average for that type of company. And you can get a sense of, well, they're doing all these other things okay, and they're understaffed from these two sensitive certifications that I now know are highly predictive of a breach risk. I'm going to follow up and do due diligence. I'm going to ask for more detail. I'm going to go into more depth. And so it's not only, I want to make the case that, yes, to Dr. Lee's point, you should use this yourself to advocate for your own teams, but you also want to use this as part of your third-party risk management process. You also want to use this to, again, maybe not throw the baby out with the bathwater, but enhance, right? I know because I help attorneys and I help legal counsel in-house. I help, CIOs and CISOs with those third-party management programs. A lot of those things are mandated. You got to do them by contract. You got to do them by rule or regulation. But this is a new way for you to actually have a very sensitive heuristic to find out, well, what is the possibility of this new vendor or this longtime vendor actually having a breach?
Yeah, and I'd like to say, so you need to know understaffing is a very strong predictor for data breach. So just the word is, you can also say, well, you should get this control and that control, but unless you've addressed the understaffing, you haven't solved the problem. The control's probably missing because they don't have enough staffing.
Correct.
Just to give you some numbers to just help you interpret this. So if a company has 4,000 employees, what we see a C grade is 8 CISSPs and 5 CISAs. So if, for 1,000 employees, we see the average is 3.6 CISSPs and 2.4 CISAs. And this is cross-industry. So it's not different for different sectors.
Right.
Security is security. And the healthcare doesn't get a pass, let's say, because they don't have as much money. If they're understaffed, they're much more likely to have a data breach. Can I also say, we can extrapolate this down to much smaller companies that are too small to directly hire, let's say, a CISSP, but they have ongoing outsourced security. And we can tell you, based on regression modeling, what average is for the number of outsourced security hours. And I was going to say,
yeah, and that's Dr. Lee, and that's one of the other things that we do with our clients, because we do, we're fortunate. We have a wide client base. I have some very sophisticated clients, but I also have a lot of really small service organizations. They are focused on providing high quality service. They may have some people on staff that are general IT certifications, but they can't compete to hire a CISSP, to hire a CISA, or even some of the other IT, security certifications. So they've outsourced a lot, right? They've got an outsourced SOC. They have a variety of other outsourced security professionals. And what we help them do is actually take a look at that and say, is that enough? Because again, to Dr. Lee's point, controls are excellent. Controls help you focus attention, but let's take one step back. If there is not a human being that can have their attention focused, it doesn't matter about the control. You need the people, and you need the people that actually have the knowledge, the sophistication, the education, the ongoing, continuing education to know what to pay attention to and how to do it, and or outsource that. And you need to have the right number of quote unquote outsourced hours.
Yeah, just to make some more comments about this. So first, this slide is from Mike, and I was going to suggest reaching out to him if you'd like a more detailed version of the slide, or you'd like to see it extended down to companies too small to have an internal security team. You know, another thing that so Mike is doing is he's also collecting data. I mean, we're interested in just the model and in forecasting data breach, but knowing the presence of other certifications, and especially IT certifications, can give you a lot of insights into how well run the company is. Even though we don't need them in the model, they may be valuable to you to be able to judge the company. And so again, I'd encourage you to reach out to Michael to get, if you're interested in getting this other data.
Yeah, we collect a variety since our we have obviously helped organizations with their third-party risk management program. But when I first met Dr. Lee, I first became aware of and sort of learned about this, I took it back and I started informing our services. And one of the things we do is we do try and collect this variety of data and information that not only directly is relevant to the model, but to Dr. Lee's point, may be interesting and helpful in context for our clients to make good decisions, right? Again, it's more valuable insight and information about other certifications, other types of staff.
So that's my my last slide. I guess the last slide is the very last slide is just so you could see what we look like on LinkedIn. Our emails, you know, we're both located here in Silicon Valley. I'd encourage you to link up with us and, you know, tell us what you think about the presentation. You know, we're endlessly refining it, trying to figure out how to best communicate that people matter. It's people that really make the difference in cybersecurity, and that's what we should be measuring. So I'd be very interested in your interpretations in what we've shown, in any of your comments on the presentation. And we
I
have other
apologize for my audio issues. Thank you all for your patience. Like I said, had a catastrophic PC failure right before I got on a plane, and I got one next day aired to me. So it's not quite set up. So that stated also, to echo Dr. Lee's point, you know, I'm not the modeler. I'm not the scientist. I'm fortunate that I was trained and I understand it well. And I understand the power of it. It's one of these things that I think once you know it and are aware of it, you can't forget about it, right? You can't unlearn it. You can't unknow it. And I felt it was really important to start using it and start using it in a pragmatic way. So for any of you out there, if you have your own thoughts about, hey, what about using the model in this manner and that manner, please reach out to me. I'll tell you how I've used it for my clients. And, you know, be happy to brainstorm with you. And no, not a sales thing, just, you know, an opportunity to talk professional to professional. Just, you know, I want to learn, and I want to help convey the importance and the power of this model, because I actually think not only is there the direct benefit of the prediction of the data breach, I've got a lot of economics training, and I also see and think there's a lot of what's called in economics positive externalities, right? There's negative externalities. You do something and something bad happens. this model can help us take a look at what are the positive externalities associated with this type of information that can either A, help us predict something, or B, drive positive change, right? So for me, if you have ideas, hey, what about using it this way? I'd very much love to learn and to hear what your thoughts are as well.
Hey, can I have you go back one slide real quick? And by the way,
Sure.
we're moving the earphones, Michael. Perfect. That's exactly what I was missing.
Great. Sorry about that, everybody. I appreciate your patience.
Yeah, no, and thank you. So just for my own understanding in looking at the slide here, when we're talking about adequate staffing, we're referring to those certification holders.
Yeah, I mean, don't forget the shopping cart. So there's much more, but at least as far as CISSP and CISA, I'm just giving you very objectively average industry values. But to tie it back to the previous slide, average is here. And this is where most companies are, and it's a really good number, at least as far as causing third-party data breach once in 1,700 years. So what does it mean, adequate staffing? In this perspective, it means to be average, just average, but it's a really good number. And honestly, what the model is telling us is most of the data breaches, or at least 50%, are caused by a really small number of companies, and they're generally understaffed. Why cybersecurity seems like a mysterious thing. Gosh, it just happened. Who would have predicted? When you start looking at staffing, it becomes clear who's going to have the data breach and who's not. And it's no
And-
longer a mystery.
Right. And
Yeah.
Dr. I can jump in real quick, Dave. I've actually had people challenge me when I've explained to them, hey, here's what, this model means, here's how we want to apply it in your scenario. And I've actually had, we'll just say, an executive somewhat sarcastically, but somewhat sharply say, oh, so all you're saying I can get rid of my cybersecurity staff except for my CISAs and my CISSPs. And as long as I have the average number of those, everything's good. And, no, that's not what we're saying, to Dr. Lee's point.
Yeah.
There needs to be, of course, the complementary staff. This isn't saying throw everybody else out and just have these two roles and just these number of people. Of course, you're all talented, you're all smart, you all know you have to have division of labor, you have to have certain number of people, and so on and so forth. All of that has to take place. But what this does is say within all of those regular purviews, you want to make sure you have an average number of these two types of certs to best reduce the likelihood of a data breach. That's really what it comes down to. It doesn't mean this is all you need, everybody else can go.
No, and that makes perfect sense. I think the way I was looking at it, or kind of digesting what you guys are sharing, is I understand what you're saying and it makes perfect sense. But when we're talking to somebody, the business owner or an executive leadership that hasn't seen the slide deck and this stuff, their interpretation of adequate staffing inherently will not roll into certifications. It's something, that we have to educate on.
Correct.
Can I say the great thing about this, you don't know what your competitors' control library looks like, but literally in a minute or two, you can know what their staffing is. And it's a very compelling argument when you show business what your competitor looks like and what you look like. And you may
Sure.
look great. I don't know, but believe me, they'll get it when you say that we're understaffed. They'll know what that means. And if you, let's say, if you're 3 times below, and there's a lot of companies that are like that, if you're 3 times below average, they'll understand that's a problem and it looks bad if other companies are looking at them. And companies are beginning to use this information and look at staffing levels in their third parties. I'll give you an example. HP Enterprise, they came to one of my talks and they're starting to collect this information. So that's what I would say to management. They'll get it, show them what your peers look like, and tell them, maybe you're really good. You don't know. You might be surprised. I find cybersecurity people always imagine the worst and they're never happy. And you may be actually better than you realize. But if you're not, you could certainly make an argument for simply being adequate.
I was just
And
going to say, better than you realize is just average. Be average is actually like a mantra you could put on a t-shirt. In this case, being average is actually a pretty good thing.
It really is. It's
Yeah.
the companies that cause the data breaches are the ones that are below average, significantly below average, by the way.
Gotcha. Yeah, and if anybody online has any questions or anything you want to drop in the chat or the Q&A, please feel free.
Should I stop the presentation?
No, I'm cool with it up, and we can just kind of keep chatting in case we need to even go back to like
Dave,
Sure.
real quickly, I saw a comment in the chat, and I actually want to just sort of echo it. Somebody noted that, gee, it's very illuminating, basically, to learn about the value of my certification. Actually, that's exactly right. Your certification does mean something. One, if you're a CISA and a CISSP, you've got a nice regression model to back you up. But 2, hey, I'm not going to make myself feel bad. I got a CDPSE. Again, all certs are good, right? All certs from quality organizations are good. Why? Again, I go back to, I think there's high standards for getting it in the first place. There is continuous education. There is typically people who have certifications are part of organizations, at least in my experience now, as a consultant on a day-to-day pragmatic basis. They're typically part of organizations that have structured security programs, right? And you actually are able to impact and provide more value in a structured security program. It's not just you running around with your, like a chicken with your head cut off. And you can use your education, you can use your ability to communicate about cybersecurity in a let's assume astute manner, because you've learned how to do that through your continuous education, your experience, to help educate your leadership, your business managers, your business leaders in a proactive manner about cybersecurity risk. Generally, that's one of the positive things I see about this, but also specifically, again, about data breach risk. To Dr. Lee's point very early on in the presentation, fortunately, yes, we read about data breaches all the time, but compared to the number of companies in the United States on an annual year, it's actually a relatively lower number. That's a great thing, right? That stated, it is actually a catastrophically bad thing, right? When it does happen, there are all kinds of cyber liability insurance ramifications. There are regulatory ramifications. There are, bad faith ramifications with vendors, with clients, with partners. You have participants. If you're in any type of insurance industry, you have customers. If you're in the market, it's just a bad look. And they're also, God forbid, I think we now know, we've seen in the news recently, there's been potential legal ramifications for individuals that are in cybersecurity roles. Nobody wants to go down that path. So it's just a really good thing. You're absolutely right to advocate for yourself and your own quality certification, but as part of a greater effort that adds a lot of value.
Can I make a point? If you have a CISA, I've looked at a lot of companies, And one of the things we can do is sensitivity analysis. We can say, well, what would happen in this organization if they got one more CISA or one more CISSP, or let's say one more MCSA, the predictors that we see in the model. And for most companies, remember that diminishing return I was telling you about?
Mhm.
With most companies, the CISA are so underhired that one more CISA makes a really big difference in reducing probability from a modeling perspective. I mean, there was a bank I worked with, and I forget how many, they had 5 or 6 CISSP. They had 2 CISAs, and one more CISA made a huge reduction. I don't remember the number, 50%, 70% in probability. So I think you need to educate management. If you got a CISA, you need to educate management in your value. It may be embarrassing that, I mean, it's for the better good, it's for your company's good to understand the value of the CISA. I don't know what you're doing, but I've been told, you know, I know it's audit, but apparently it's really important. And I had the CISO at Williams Sonoma. She's got a CISA. And I asked her, you know, what would more CISA do? And she said, well, if we had more CISA, first she said, well, we could audit things more often instead of every other year. For example, we could audit the firewall testing. She said, but another thing is if we had enough CISAs, we can embed one in every new project from the get-go. So you guys know better than, I'll tell you another thing is, there's a CISO that I worked with, and when I worked with him, he used the model for staffing. And he told me right off, he said, I don't like auditors. He said, I don't like being embarrassed in front of the board. And I don't like auditors. Well, when I finished with him, he got a CISA himself, and he hired additional ones himself. He trained them up internally. And what he said to me is, I want to get ahead of audit, but, you know, discover the things before internal audit discovers them. But he came to realize that they really were important. I had another cybersecurity person tell me that she's a consultant in the UK. Sarah Clark is her name. She said, I've always assumed everybody does the right thing. And you know, when I leave a company with the consulting, you know, I expect them to do the right things. And she said, I've come to realize they don't. That's audit. I mean, you tell me, I mean, I'm talking to ISACA, but making sure people are doing the right things, verifying, I think is the value. So going back to the person, yes, we've measured your value, you know, but I'm preaching to the choir. And I feel that this information needs to go to management, and they need to understand the value of audit. It's not just cybersecurity. That's just a part-time job. So that's my comment. I really think management needs to see these numbers, understand, you know, the problem in staffing. They need to understand they should be average, and they need to understand the value of these certifications and the value of the CISA. Any comment?
Piggybacking on something Dr. Lee said, so what I do a lot of, me and my team, we do a lot of HIPAA, you know, security rule assessments, right? It's one of the things that we do. Organizations have us come in also and perform, in essence, risk assessments using the NIST CSF framework, previously 1.1, now 2.0. We do it with a variety of assessments. And they have us do it because many of the organizations, to Dr. Lee's point, they have underinvested in audit. So they have a bunch of IT people, they have some cybersecurity professionals, and they think they've been doing great. And now, HIPAA security rule, you have to have an outside assessment on a regular basis. It's not an agency rule. It's not been dictated by HHS, but everybody legally, councils typically say every 2 to 3 years. And what do I find when I go back in organizations? That I have previously done a HIPAA security risk assessment, I found they've improved. When I go into organizations that have not done one in 5 or 6 years, and they said, well, we didn't need to, our council said there wasn't a dictate, we could do it, we could push it out, and we just sort of kept track ourselves, and they don't have any internal audit like a CISA, what do I find? I find they actually haven't improved much at all, because they don't have, I think that internal somebody looking at them and saying, validate, and taking a look at, let's face it, we all have confirmation bias. I did X, I think X is fine. I read this is what I did. We validated internally inside the group. To have a third party internal audit or outside come in and take a look at you and say, show me the proof, let me see what you did, let me see how it was done. Actually, I have found gets better results and more positive results from a control perspective. And I would argue that feeds into what is illustrated, I suspect, in Dr. Lee's model, right? Actually having that structured third-party validation of what you're doing probably means you're going to be doing it better, more systematically, more rigorously.
Can I
Here-
address some of the comments that I see? Is that okay?
Yeah, I want to dive into those. I just wanted to say one thing before we went there, which is kind of an echo of what you guys are saying. Actually, just two thoughts real quick, and we'll jump into the comments. One is Tim and I have these talks a lot. For the role I have in the chapter, I lead with cybersecurity, information security. It's what I do, it's what I know. So when I'm out looking for speakers and stuff, you go with what you know. Tim's on the other side looking at it through the audit perspective, and we're trying and just for as alike as we are and as much overlap, there is a bit of differentiation in our wiring, and the reality is, if you take what I try to bring to the table and what he brings to the table, which really are a reflection of both of these certifications, that's where the magic happens.
Yeah, it's symbiotic. That's exactly right. You can't just have a bunch of CISAs and think you're going to have a great cybersecurity, breach protection program, nor can you have just a bunch of CISSPs. The magic is, to your point, and I think magic is the word, although, this is science. This isn't magic. This was an empirical model that was discovered and uses some awesome regression analysis, but magic is the word, right? It is pretty amazing when you combine these two skill sets. It actually, you see it reflected in the actual predictions, right? And that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to throw something else out there that kind of went in the back of my mind. And I just want to mention it because I thought it was interesting, but in the chapter and personally, I try and help out a lot of students. We are the stewards of who's coming in to our industry. And sometimes the cost of certifications can be a limiting factor, I'll put it that way. So I was trying to be respectful of that, but the CISA and the CISSP, to some degree, you can say point being, for whatever they cost, it's still a fraction of what a SANS certification would be. And I just found it interesting that these were the two certifications you guys landed on, regardless of cost, value, or the investment somebody would be making in themselves.
I had no idea what these certs meant. I was testing them in the model. I gotta just tell you, I asked CISOs what we should try. Red Hat is here because I had a CISO say, I think this is a good cert, and I think these people really know their stuff. And so we were pretty surprised that it was a negative predictor. You know, can I say that I think I know that you guys work really hard to drive up sort of the supply of CISAs. In my opinion, ISACA needs to work on the demand. Like I say, you're undervalued. You're not recognized for the tremendous value you bring to cybersecurity, to companies, period. I wish that ISACA would pivot a bit and promote their value to the business. I mean, let them go crazy trying to find you. I mean, your salaries will go up if we could drive up the demand. And as far as the cost, the CISO that I said didn't like CISAs, but then became one himself, he paid for the training internally. So they looked at it as so valuable, they trained him, they paid for everything.
Yeah.
So to me, that's the ideal thing. Business should be paying for the certifications, and we don't have enough, and we should be driving that up, in my opinion. So I wish you guys would promote your value. I wish the people, you know, that heard this talk could go talk with maybe their CISO or whoever
Yeah.
there
And
is.
there's lots of, besides the initial cost, we all know what, Dave, to your point about, young people entering into, or frankly, anybody maybe switching careers, entering into a certification program. There's the initial cost, and then there's the ongoing, right? The CPEs.
Yeah.
For my cert, I think it's like 40 CPEs a year is recommended, 120 every 3 years. If you got to pay for that, that's a lot. Now, fortunately, quality organizations generally have a lot of free educational opportunities to get CPEs where you are exposed to new stuff, where you do, come to presentations like this, where you do take tests or quizzes, etc. And, so once you get over that hump, there are ways to do it for free. I encourage all of my clients. Again, I'm a big believer in, yes, the CISSP and the CISA are the most sensitive for the model. But if I have a company that has a particular need for, let's say, a CISM, I'm going to say, get the CISM. Don't not get the CISM. You need that. You have validated that role. That's going to help you. That is a good cert. It's going to help you. Don't say, I'm not going to go get that one because I think I should go get a CISA. If you need this more and you've justified it and you understand it, go get it. It's still good. What I try and educate people on is, hey, this is a powerful model and you want more of these two types of roles, but in general, you want more certified people, certified MCSAs, certified other high quality cybersecurity certs. It's going to have a positive impact on two things. One, your breach risk, but also two, as I alluded to earlier, I've actually seen it in a pragmatic way, the positive externalities of having more of these people who are just more attuned to having structured cybersecurity programs, more systematic. And guess what? Again, I'm going to go back to that headline from that 2017, Dr. Lee's heard me say this a million times before, 2017 famous paper on AI put out from Google. Attention is all you need. You got to have attention on these things. People who know what they're doing and enough people knowing what they're doing is the key to success, right? Having a great control book doesn't matter if there's not somebody who understands them and not enough people to do them.
It boils down to the famous three things, right? At the end of the day, people, processes, and technology. And so people and technology is not enough. Processes need to be there. And that's where sometimes where the overlap needs to be.
in modeling, of course, we couldn't measure processes or technology, but we could measure the people. And it's stunning that we could get such an accurate model just based on people. But the process and the technology are the things that are
What
in
the
the
people
shopping
bring.
cart.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
They're
And
what the
that's what I think.
people are paying attention to. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we all know this. Almost anything in life comes down to people, right? Almost anything comes down to, you can have the greatest of tools and technology, but if you have less than stellar people, it's not going to mean much, right? You need high quality people at the base.
Hey, I was gonna switch gears. Tim and Laz, I don't know if you guys had anything you wanted to chime in on, but I was gonna certainly want to let you speak. And then I was just gonna switch over to working through what people posted in the chat.
Yeah. So just a couple observations. First, Dr. Lee, thank you so much for putting this together. And Michael, thanks for sharing your insight as an industry expert in this area. I think there are two things that I think about for the future of our industry. The first one is you are basically validating that we need qualified and trained personnel to carry the programs in the industry forward. So I think that's pretty interesting because at a time where we, whatever the number is, we have somewhere between X and Y worldwide positions that can't be fulfilled. What you're doing is validating that we need qualified and trained people. The second thing is, and I would challenge the attendees to think about this. If you're building out your career over the next 2 to 5 years, I look at this like a bunch of rings that are like honing in on our careers. So the first one is the CISSP, the next one's the CISA. Well, guess what? IAPP and CISM and some of those others become, part of the core. If you're working inside out or outside in, I think that also, and this goes back to a couple of comments that were made, it validates what we're doing as practitioners. It validates the certification program, making sure we're qualified and trained. But then it also helps me level up my game, whether I'm going to talk internally to the team or if a recruiter calls me and says, I'm having a bad day or, I'm looking for my next role. It's kind of like, hey, listen, this could also be like in the model. It'd be cool, like here's your validation report. You are now worth, because you have this, you're now worth 20% more in your base salary. Oh no, hey man, it's, hey, I'm worth 20% more because I just earned this. Or I'm going to step in and solve complex problems, and I'm going to help this organization level up its game, not only for the company, but I'm going to help level up the team. I mean, these are the things I wrote down, and I was, like thinking about as we're going
Dr.
through.
Lee, think about Laz. I'm just thinking real quickly off the top of my head. Let's see, how could that work? I could say, let's see, maximum potential cost of a breach, the amount my certification reduced that. There's the gap. This is my new percent increase.
So first, can I make an observation? If they raise salaries, that would certainly solve the staffing problem, right? I mean, that's supply and demand. And so if business begins to understand the value of adequate staffing, there's a shortage, they'll pay more, and that will solve the problem. You'll get more people that are becoming certified and becoming cybersecurity. It's just a matter of money. So can I make that observation? Whatever ISACA and IC2 are doing, they're doing the right thing. And that's why your certs are so valuable. I propose that maybe they could do it even better. And one of the things they could do better is maybe understand the value of the people themselves. And so we did an empirical regression modeling. It's very crude from the perspective there's only 2 certifications. Why doesn't ISACA think about the value of all these different people and weigh in themselves? How many should be in an organization, and what the value of these certs are? How many managers do you need, and so forth? So I've looked at it from purely a science perspective. We already recognize this organization is valuable and they know their stuff. How about let's look at the people? And That's my comment. You know, we presented our models to the Federal Reserve, some different models on the costs. And one of the things that they emphasized to us is the most valuable thing that a really good model can bring are insights to the subject matter expert. And so I hope this brings some insights, and it helps you think. And really there's many different certifications and training. How would you use them? If you were hiring, if you were a CISO, what would you hire? So coming back to the value in your career, that's my comment. I think in a way you could put the value on these certifications. You could say, what's more valuable? Maybe some are more valuable for large organizations, you know, but that's anyway, my comment.
Sure. Cool. Well, here, I'm gonna switch over to some of the comments that we had in the chat. And just real quick to those that were asking, we are recording this, so we'll be putting a copy of the recording up on the chapter's YouTube page and on the website. And if it's cool with you guys, we'll get a PDF copy of the slide deck, make that and share that with everybody if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, cool. Okay, so from Mike, without speaking to facts not released and available in public domain, can any specific example companies be cited? Example, company X only had Y number of CISSPs. Attract, watch the 23andMe, wondered about them.
So what I can't, good question. What I can say, I'm going to give you a couple of different illustrations of how I've used the model and how it's helped. One of which is a direct answer and one of which is an indirect answer, but I also think is illuminating. So first things first, Dr. Lee alluded to a few companies that he's actually gone in and, you know, one guy didn't like CISA, so now he's getting one. I've started to have similar conversations with my clients whereby I have tried to educate them using the model and using what I know, because again, you can't unknow this once you know it. And I do see that actually they have, when they're putting in their planning for hiring, because everybody has plans for budgets. Now's the time they're doing it in my industries, right, for next year. And they are actually planning for, you know, new hires. And I'm getting calls and I'm getting emails. Hey, you did this for us 7 months ago, 6 months ago. You told me about this 5 months ago. I'm thinking we're going to try and supplement with A, B, and C. And that's where the conversation around the certs comes in, right? Do they not have enough just basic IT people? Well, then get yourself just some good basic MCSA or something like that, just to use some illustrations from here in the presentation. But if they're a decent sized organization, I'm going to say to them, yeah, if you'll recall, we said you were probably understaffed as far as the CISSPs. You should hire another CISSP, right? If you can't, get yourself a CISA. So that's one thing that actually does come about, and those conversations are starting to happen. What recently happened, and Dr. Lee knows about this because he actually helped me do it, is we did a breach risk, a probability breach risk assessment of an organization for their third-party population that had their, you know, confidential, sensitive, non-public data and information. I'll be more specific than Dr. Lee, EPHI, PII, et cetera, right? And a lot of these vendors they had had for a long time, and the CIO had been there a long time, had a small but very competent IT staff, wasn't a really large organization, but it actually served a very, very large company, right? Very well-known global brand. And we looked at their third parties and noted that, hey, actually, your breach risk is pretty good, but it could be improved if you did A, B, and C. So they went back and they actually took a look at based on the breach risk probabilities that Dr. Lee, illuminated here. And they said, you know what? So these 10 vendors don't need to have access to all this other data that they're having because they're a higher breach risk. We weren't even paying attention to what data they were being shared. It had been on autopilot for years. And what we're going to do is we're going to just basically reduce the scope of what data they get. They can still do their job. And guess what? It's going to reduce the breach risk because we don't have much control over that relationship and we can't force them to go hire more CISSPs, more CISAs. But what we can do is reduce their possible scope of data, right? So that's another novel way that we can use this information to actually reduce our own risk in ways that we control versus ways that we can't control.
I could make a comment towards that. I can mention a couple of companies that have had a data breach and they're different than they were at the time of the data breach. One of them is Equifax. So it's really interesting. We were collecting data right after their data breach and before the data breach and after the data breach, you could just look at their hiring. You could tell exactly when they knew they had their data breach because they were hiring already CISSPs like a couple of months before they made it public. And they weren't hiring anybody before that. By the time they were finished hiring, about 1 year later, it followed a bell curve, by the way, they had doubled the number of CISSPs. And I would say, this is, several years ago, but I would say they were just about where they should have been before the data breach. They were about average for a company of that size. Another example is SolarWinds. I remember looking at them right after they caused the chaos. And amazingly, for a company of that size, they were 2,000 employees. They had no CISAs, 0 CISAs on staff. Let's see, 2,000 employees. If we look at that slide, how many would that be? Would we expect? Almost 4 CISAs at that point. No, that doesn't mean when you plug the numbers into the model, it doesn't mean something flashes and said, red data breach. It just means they're many times higher probability. And remember, the average for a very large data breach is a really low probability. So high probability is like 1% or 2%. But when you begin to look at a bunch of companies at 1 or 2%, you begin to see data breaches over the years. So there's two companies as examples. Talk to me afterwards if you want to know. I wouldn't want to say where it could be recorded. Companies change a lot. And it would just not be fair to a company to mention them. They're understaffed because next year they may be incredible. And so DocuSign, I watched them make a big increase in their staffing. The same with Zoom. So that's why it's not a good thing to just announce it in a YouTube video. And
well, hey, so Dr. Lee, what another dimension might be fun, and I'd leave this up to the panel and the attendees. But now, because of breach disclosure with the SEC for public and privately held companies, so a publicly held company has to disclose within 4 days if the breach was material, number one. Number two, they have to show their program, what they're doing for security program management. Do they have a board member? And do they have an executive inside the company that is responsible and accountable for cybersecurity? I think those would be some fun dimensions if you wanted to maybe track those for the next 12 months.
Modeling.
You know what I mean? And then I'm looking at like the annual, the Dr. Lee annual report, because it's like, Gibbo Security comes back and it's like, hey, look, here's dimension 1, qualified and trained personnel. Dimension 2, publicly traded companies that have made the investment or not. Those would be fun.
I'm very interested in any other ideas people have that would be fun. I just will say collecting the data is very expensive. So, and then we are limited. So there's only a couple thousand public companies. So this is a small data set compared to 5 to 7 million. But yes, it would be fun. I'll just say this though. I see what companies report, when they say, oh yeah, we got it. We got somebody in charge. It's BS. I mean, when you look at the qualifications and so forth of those people. So I just warn you, the one neat thing about the CISSP and CISA is I think generally people are pretty honest. And as we look at companies, it seems to be pretty accurate, the data that we're collecting. When somebody gets a CISSP, they are so proud of it that they'll put it on their LinkedIn profile before a PhD if they have it. That's how hard it is to get and how proud they are that they've got it. So certifications are a really neat way to measure.
Yeah, there was, what was I gonna say? It just came to me and escaped me.
I talk
It'll
too
come
much.
back, but just the next question on here, and I don't know, see if we can get through as many of these as possible, but does the model speak to folks with both a CISA and CISSP? Is there a significant benefit to an organization or a professional to be dual certified?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know. And maybe you can answer that question for me. I'll tell you what we put in the model. When we count, we pay no attention to whether people are dual certified. And I know a lot of people are. But if you've got 2 certs, we'll count you twice when we put the data in the model. So,
Okay.
but in the model is very accurate. But are you really worth twice as much? I can't say. You could maybe say, but I can't.
Make that argument
and you
come
don't.
evaluation time.
Yeah. But from a modeling perspective, we can't tell. And it would take too much time. And I don't think we get much more value out of it to figure out whether people are dual certified or not. Like I said, we didn't have to tinker a whole lot. It just I mean, maybe we shouldn't be surprised that counting the people that are trained and certified and experienced should happen to be a really strong predictor, and you don't need a whole lot of other stuff. I
Yeah.
know people are hungry for more things, and it doesn't answer the question I know cybersecurity people want, which is about controls. But maybe we should just be happy to know we're extremely valuable.
Yeah,
I use the word
and
we. I'm not certified.
well, I don't know, like I don't have any data for like a financial part of it, but I do know that the body of knowledge for each of them is unique in its own way and very valuable. So if somebody is to get to the point where they could possess both, there's a huge value there. Translating it to a dollar amount, I can't do that.
I had a manager observe to me. He had a CISA, and then he got a CISSP. He's a CISO for a bank, and he said that he felt the CISA certification was a good certification to hold for a manager because he said a lot of risk. I mean, he said not everything is handled with a control, and a lot of risk may be related to a process or whatever. And he felt that the CISA certification was a more holistic view of risk. You could tell me, I don't have this cert, that maybe the knowledge is complementary. I don't know.
I saw Tim nodding there, and I agree with his nod. But you're muted, Tim.
You'll see, yes, that's a good point. You'll see CISAs may not necessarily be embedded in the IT group at all, right? You may have them in finance, you may have them in accounting, you might have them in production, a bunch of different places. And I think that's where they bring the value, which then can be translated because they go, hey, I know how this process works. We need to get these controls in place, which then prevents further technical problems downstream.
I got a question for you. Again, I don't have a CISA. I didn't even know what they were until, we did the model. But as I understand, so from the modeling perspective, they're equal. We just count them. We don't pay any attention to where they work within an organization or whether they're dual sorted. We just count them. So I presume that we're counting people that don't even have anything to do with cybersecurity. Is that true?
That is true.
And
That
yet-
can be true. That
Yeah,
can
Yeah,
be
and
true.
yet-
very well could be. Yeah.
And yet, this raw count of CISA is equal to the raw count of CISSPs. And I presume anybody with a CISSP is truly fully 100% focused on cybersecurity. So could we assume that the CISA is actually better than the CISSP since they only put part of their time in cybersecurity or only part of their numbers are devoted to cybersecurity? Or is a CISA kind of a cultural thing? Is it a measure of the company's culture? It doesn't matter where they work. It's a measure of the company's interest in being compliant, following good policies and
governance.
procedures.
Yeah.
Yeah, in governance.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, I would put it, this is Laz, just Dr. Lee. Yeah. So personally, I've seen it under governance because, and I would ask everybody that's attending also where they're seeing it. For me, traditionally, I've seen it under IT audit that really, really wants to understand what's happening from a controls perspective. And I have my CISA, but I think what you're doing is you're showing a holistic view with the CISSP or potentially the CISM, looking at all security controls. The challenge that we're faced with as practitioners, thanks, Jim, that Jim's comment there is, governance or GRC, but I think the issue that we're seeing or the challenge that we're seeing right now as practitioners, everybody wants a holistic view, right? And Michael said it best. Hey, look, third-party risk, or, growing the company, the CISO, have to be understanding what's going on everywhere. We've got data spillage, third-party use, AI, AppSec, HTML5 wrappers on legacy equipment, on mainframes. All that stuff's going out there. So the question that I would ask in my Dr. Lee report for 2025, when you're looking at these dimensions, it would be interesting to see what that relationship is, across an organization. And maybe it's, you sample 10 organizations like you did with the 3 financial institutions, because I'll tell you what, my experience, and I always do a gut check, like, hey, this is actually pretty interesting. How could I apply this as a practitioner? I think it would be interesting to come back and show ISACA, ISC2, and ISSA, hey, look, here's another set of dimensions that you can use to help educate and promote the certifications.
I got a question for you. When I reached out to the parent company, ISACA, when I talked with those people, they were very adamant that CISAs need to report independently in internal audit. That was kind of the thing, but especially independent of the CISO.
That's
what
true.
I see, okay, but then what I see statistically, if I just, the silly scientist that I am, I just look and say, well, gosh, if we just had more of these people, it doesn't matter where they report. But I ask you, I have one CISO that says, I want the CISAs and I want them reporting to me because I want to know what's going on. I wonder if there aren't more uses for the CISA than internal audit, maybe a lot of people really have interest in knowing what the hell's going on in the company,
right,
and knowing when something's sloppy.
Margaret, I think, added another dimension for the Dr. Lee 2025 report, which is also going to be the CPA. Because if you do look at the function for governance, we're seeing the rise of the CISA role under, finance, or think about it like this group reports to the board. And if I have a separate function for IT audit that's reporting to the board, that function sometimes includes cybersecurity and sometimes does not.
Right.
And it's, and I think, Michael, keep us honest, right? In industry, that's been one of the biggest challenges. It's kind of like I report on my controls, but it's not a holistic view.
That's exactly it. So, governance, risk, and control, GRC, this is one of the things that Dr. Lee and I have lots of conversations about. The way organizations do things by different sector, by, different service, it's somewhat idiosyncratic. And you don't necessarily have a uniform, holistic view. This is how it should be done. Not because it's not known, but because it hasn't been done that way. It's not necessarily been as uniform, been as systematic. And so, absolutely, I think you're right. One of the things I would point to is we all, for those of us on the practitioner side, NIST recently, published 2.0. And what did they do? They took governance functions out of all the other identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, and they moved them into their own category now. So now there's a governance category within the NIST CSF framework, right? And I think that
I
speaks to,
know, but it's so confusing as a practitioner because that's not how we grew up.
I agree, but to Laz, my point is, it is confusing, especially confusing because everybody's been used to doing it one way, and now all of a sudden there's this, and it's like, what the heck? But it speaks to, finally, though, people are starting to recognize the importance of governance. Whether or not it was executed well, right? You could argue, and that's fine. My point is, people are starting to recognize the importance of governance,
That's
right?
true. That's very, very true. But the reporting structure and the CERT it's
No,
not,
they
it's
don't.
just, a little chaos right now in industry.
It is. I agree. It's going to take many years of friction to figure that out and where we settle down, right?
Yeah. And Dave, I know you go to solution pretty fast. How can we accelerate that with the next generation?
We have to start with education much
Yeah.
earlier than we currently are now. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Hey, there is one, I know we went over time just a little bit, but I did want to read what people said about Katrina had said, "Thank you for such an insightful presentation and comments. There was a
Thanks.
brief comment about privacy and certifications, CIPP based and now AIGP. I'm a privacy pro and would appreciate your thoughts on the extent privacy controls and communications impacted your findings. Did you feel more communication information from privacy perspective would have been helpful?"
I don't know. I mean, can I just say, the modeling effort is very simple. I mean, we just went out and measured what we could measure for all of these companies, 5 to 7 million companies. So it's so superficial if you think about it. What in the certs, we tried a lot of certs. I don't remember all of them. I don't know if there were privacy
Sure.
certs. I can't say. So I would just say it's very superficial, but yet it's very accurate. And I couldn't say. I do think what additional things are going on is really interesting. I don't have any data on it. Maybe reach out to me and tell me some things you think we could measure for any company that would give you some clues. That's
And
not a very good
I would-
answer, I know, but
I would just re-emphasize something that we alluded earlier. Dr. Lee doesn't have the data, but on all certs, but I would say, just like in that shopping cart, remember there's milk and diapers. Those are the most sensitive measures, but there are other things in that shopping cart that are valuable and important. And, one of the takeaways I took from, learning about the model and, being enmeshed in it and trying to apply it for my clients is, quality certifications, privacy and security. And privacy is a sort of a tangential right there with security. They add value. And, so I would say it's one of those quality certs that we yes, it adds value. It just isn't as sensitive as the measure. But, to Dr. Lee's point, I'm not aware of anything either for that he shared with me or anywhere else that has anything as direct.
But can I say, reach out to me. I don't know completely what you're after with the communication, but we could discuss it. And the challenge is to think of something simple that we could measure that would get at the thing that you actually want to measure. I mean, we'll be looking for an indirect way to measure it. Now, I'll just give you some hints. By the way, I found that companies that suddenly have a whole lot more lawyers on staff tend to be ones that are being sued. And another thing is, one of the things we have to get at is how big companies are. I found indirectly looking at the number of HR people was a good measure of how big the company really is. So sort of think about what you'd like to measure. It may be a very good thing to measure. And next, think about how we could measure it indirectly, and very simply. I just encourage you to reach out. They probably have some good ideas, and I'm looking for more good ideas here.
Yeah, I would encourage anybody here interested to connect up with these guys. Behind the scenes, it literally took Thomas and I over a year to get this coordinated, and but it's more than worth it for everything that we're covering, and not only what you guys are sharing, but the quality of the comments and the questions and everything that we're getting.
This is the really interesting part for me. I like to, engage with people and, just meet more intelligent people that actually care about things that I care about, right? Because if you're here, you care about these things, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and Lance, just as a quick follow-up to what you were saying earlier, I'm just a huge advocate that I think awareness of this stuff needs to start in elementary school. I'm an advocate that if we can start it culturally correct in elementary school, the kids can help their parents.
Yeah.
The kids can help their grandparents. And there's a lot of ways to kind of generate momentum and in that way they would definitely be understanding more what the risks are, and we would have so many more people at a high school level. Yeah, you don't got the 5 years of experience for one of these certifications, but you're understanding the foundational stuff towards it and you're well on your way.
Definitely.
Yeah. Cool. I think we are over time. Guys, I just want to thank you both for everything here. This has been fantastic. Thank you, Tim, Laz, for joining. If anybody has any closing thoughts, we can do that and then maybe wrap. I'll put you on the spot, Tim.
Well, I think it was a good session. I like the fact, it's important to see that, speaking as the IT audit side, I think it's important to see the value of both and how they really play against each other. I would like to follow up a little bit with Dr. Lee offline, to be honest, and see what other things we can look at.
Yeah, I got a feeling it's on my to-do list to set up a follow-up with all the panelists here. So it's coming. Cool. Laz, any closing thoughts or?
Yeah, first of all, I want to thank everybody for being here tonight, and Dave and the panel, thank you for the invitation. I think two things I would walk away with. One is Michael said it best. There's a bridge that's being built from today to tomorrow because NIST has now incorporated governance. So we have to be cognizant of that. The second thing is there's incredible value in the data that's talking about how we can be thinking about how to level up our game, our team's game, and also help out our company and the industry. Yeah, so Dr. Lee, thanks for posting that. I was just going to say, I would just encourage everybody to stay connected online. And, Dave, as always, I think there's a lot to think about after this one.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's been fantastic. And Thomas and Michael, I'll let you guys with closing thoughts.
Well, I'm going to let Dr. Lee close. You know, he's the mad scientist behind all of this. I'm just
Yes, he is.
I've
Yeah.
just become a friend and an advocate, and somebody who actually thinks very highly of the science behind it and the methodology, and his passion for it. So I'd say thank you very much for having me, and think about how you can pragmatically use this. It doesn't matter if you think it in your head. I'm a big fan of the concept, one's ethics are in one's actions. So take some actions, try and do the best you can with what you have, and make your environment more secure as best as you can based on this information. And if you have ideas or questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm going to repost my information. I am happy to be a resource and share with you thoughts on, pragmatic ways you can utilize it. But also, I'm really open and curious to hear what new ideas and novel applications that people have about how they can use this.
And and what you just said, and thank you, you reminded me what I forgot. And one of the additional benefits an employer gets with someone that has a CISA or CISSP is not only the body of knowledge, but the code of ethics that ISC squared and ISACA will hold these professionals to.
Yeah.
And you get a lot more transparency and stuff like that from there as well. So let me just thank you guys. Remember, Thomas,
I got a closing comment.
Yeah.
Please promote your value for the good of all of us, for all the damn data breaches and all the times that my personal data has been exposed. Promote your value to management. They need to know. And that's promote ISACA, and they need to understand the value of these certifications. It's not an opinion. We find it empirically.
Yeah.
That's my comment.
No, that's great. And my only closing comment was, like I said, I remember starting to talk about this over a year ago. And the first time you explained it to me, it was just such a unique way to look at this godforsaken industry that we swim in every day. But just to see it through another perspective was a huge eye opener for me. So. Cool. All right. Well, I'll let you guys go.
Thank you.
To everybody. Lots of platitudes in the comments. Thanks for everybody that did post. And Margaret, I saw your comment about the FR Secure CISSP mentor program. So glad you took advantage of it. It's something that where I work offers a free program every year. That people can sign up for. We go through all the domains, and where I work, we're really trying to help fix a broken industry. And that's one of the ways we try to play it forward, is to help others help themselves. So on that note, I'll let you guys all go. Thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Appreciate everything.
All
Thanks.
right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Right
you.
on.
Take care.